Welcome back, criminophiles, to another episode of Homicide Cases. I'm your host, Misfit. I'm William Archard, an American serial killer with 3 victims, but I'm suspected of killing 6.
Toxicology and Matrimonial Homicide, a comprehensive analysis of the William Dale Archard case. Archard was a serial killer who used insulin to murder his victim.
The criminal career of William Archard stands as a singular milestone in the history of American jurisprudence and forensic toxicology, representing the first successful prosecution in the United States for homicide by insulin overdose. Archard, a man whose external demeanor was described as the very opposite of a serial killer, utilized his specialized medical knowledge to weaponize a life-saving hormone, exploiting the diagnostic limitations of mid-20th century medicine to carry out a series of homicides spanning nearly 2 decades. His case not only necessitated a revolutionary advancement in the detection of insulin within human tissue, but also prompted the California Supreme Court to establish critical precedents regarding pre-indictment delay and the admissibility of evidence relating to unchanged offenses. This report provides an exhaustive examination into Archard's life, his lethal methodology, and the clinical progression of his victims, and the complex forensic and legal maneuvers that ultimately led to his conviction.
Biographical foundations and the Camarillo training grounds.
William Archard was born on May 5, 1912, in Dardanelle, Arkansas. While little is documented of his early childhood, his later actions suggest a man driven by a profound but undisciplined interest in the medical field. By the late 1930s, Archard had migrated to California, where he sought employment that would allow him to operate within clinical environments, despite lacking formal medical accreditation. From 1940 to 1941, Archard worked as an attendant at the Camarillo State Mental Hospital. This period was formative, as he was assigned to the insulin shock therapy ward, a then prevalent psychiatric treatment that involved inducing hypoglycemic comas in patients suffering from schizophrenia and other severe disorders. At Camarillo, Archard was part of a specialized ward shock team, which included doctors, registered nurses, and attendants. His training was rigorous and specific. He was taught to administer injections of regular insulin, monitor the progressive stages of hypoglycemic shock, and identify danger signals such as heavy sweating, heavy breathing, and pupillary changes. Crucially, he was also trained in the reversal process, administering glucose through gastric tubes or intravenously to revive patients from their comas. This environment provided Archard with a deep, practical understanding of how to manipulate blood sugar levels to induce a state that mimicked natural neurological trauma, an expertise he would later refine for homicidal purposes. Following his tenure at Camarillo, Archard's life took a decidedly criminal turn. In 1950, he was sentenced to 5 years of probation in San Francisco for the illegal possession of morphine sulfate. His inability to conform to societal norms were further evidenced when his probation was revoked following a subsequent drug offense. This led to a period of incarceration at a minimum security prison in Chino, from which he escaped in 1951. Although he was eventually recaptured and transferred to San Quentin, he was released again in 1953. It was during the ensuing years that Archard embarked on a series of marriages, earning him the moniker serial matrimonialist, as his wives and associates began to die under suspicious circumstances characterized by sudden, unexplained comas. Archer's methodology was characterized by a sophisticated blending of medical intervention and staged accidents. By creating a narrative of physical trauma, such as a hit and run accident or a fall, he ensured that attending medical personnel would focus on potential brain injuries rather than metabolic imbalances. This medical masquerade allowed the primary cause of the coma, exogenous insulin, to remain undetected during the critical hours of hospitalization. October 12, 1947, William Jones Jr. July 25, 1956, Zella A. Archer. March 13, 1958, Juanita Plum Archer. March 17, 1960, Frank L. Stewart. October 10, 1960, Stella Morin. September 2, 1961, Bernie Kirk Archer. November 3, 1966, Mary Brinker Post. The earliest identified case involved William Jones Jr. in 1947. Jones, who is facing child molestation charges, conspired with Archer to fake an injury to avoid police questioning. Archer administered insulin to Jones, who was eventually found near a damaged car. Jones exhibited the classic early symptoms of hypoglycemia: nervousness, hunger, and a subnormal temperature, which the admitting hospital failed to recognize as insulin poisoning. Jones eventually lapsed into a terminal coma, providing Archer with proof of concept. Insulin could effectively mimic the symptoms of a head injury and result in death without immediate forensic detection.
Matrimonial homicides and pecuniary motives.
Archer's marriages were often short lived and seemingly motivated by financial gain. His fourth wife, Zella, died only 2 months after their wedding in 1956. To explain her sudden coma, Archer reported a highly improbable robbery at their Los Angeles home. He claimed that two intruders had injected both him and Zella with hypodermic needles. While Archer remained unaffected, Zella suffered convulsions and died without regaining consciousness. Although investigators found a vial of insulin and a needle nearby, the lack of definitive testing at the time meant her death was officially attributed to bronchopneumonia. The pattern continued with his fifth wife, Juanita, whom he married in early 1958. Only 2 days after their wedding, Juanita was found in a coma in Las Vegas. Despite a low blood sugar reading, her death was attributed to a self-administered barbiturate overdose, an explanation that Archer likely encouraged. In 1960, a friend named Frank Stewart died after a similar hospital visit from Archer, following a staged fall in an airport restroom intended to facilitate an insurance claim. In each of these cases, Archer was the common denominator, often the last person seen with the victim before they lapsed into a coma, and frequently the primary beneficiary of their estate or insurance policies. The most poignant of Archer's crimes involved his 15-year-old nephew, Bernie Kirk Archer. Following the death of his brother Everett, Archer was entrusted as a co-trustee of a $5,000 insurance policy for the boy. In August 1961, Bernie was hospitalized after reporting a hit and run accident. During his stay, Archer visited him and the boy's condition rapidly worsened. Bernie developed unequal pupil sizes, a hallmark of brain trauma that Archer may have introduced using atropine, and a significantly low glucose level in his cerebrospinal fluid. Despite the suspicions of some medical staff, the limitations of contemporary toxicology meant that no crime could be proven, and Archer was able to evade detection for several more years.
Clinical pathology of low blood sugar and insulin shock.
The physiological mechanism utilized by Archer was the introduction of severe hypoglycemia, a state where the blood sugar levels fall below the threshold required to sustain cerebral function. Because the brain relies almost exclusively on glucose for energy, prolonged deprivation, typically referred to as neuroglycopenia, leads to irreversible cellular damage and death. Expert testimony during Archer's trial emphasized that natural causes of severe hypoglycemia are rare and typically accompanied by a long history of progressive symptoms. For example, a pancreatic tumor would usually be large enough to be detected during a standard autopsy. Furthermore, conditions such as liver disease or adrenal failure present with distinct anatomical changes that were absent in Archer's victims. The clinical profile of his victims, healthy one day and dead of hypoglycemic coma the next, was, according to medical consensus, indicative of exogenous insulin administration.
The forensic breakthrough: science versus the perfect homicide weapon.
20 years, Archer successfully navigated the silent nature of insulin. Unlike arsenic or morphine, insulin is an endogenous substance that rapidly metabolizes and disappears from the bloodstream. At the time of Zella's death in 1956 and Bernie's in 1961, there was no standard laboratory test that could distinguish between naturally occurring insulin and an injection. The investigation finally gained momentum following the death of Archer's seventh wife, Mary Brinker Post. An accomplice, Arthur, died in a coma following a minor accident. Lieutenant White of the Los Angeles Homicide Department, who had been investigating Archer's history of fraudulent accident claims, coordinated a massive interdisciplinary effort to prove the criminal use of insulin. This led to a consultation with Dr. Edward Arquilla at the UCLA Medical Center. Dr. Arquilla had developed a groundbreaking technique using antibodies to measure insulin levels in tissue. This process involved extracting insulin from brain tissue of the victims and measuring it both biologically using the mouth injection test or immunologically. The realization that insulin remnants could be measured in the brain provided the corpus delicti necessary for an indictment. Interesting, although a more sensitive radioimmunoassay had been developed by Rosalind Yalow and Solomon Benson in 1960, the investigators in the Archer case utilized Dr. Arquilla's method to build their forensic evidence.
In the legal proceedings of People v. Archer 1970, the prosecution presented compelling evidence, ultimately leading to a guilty verdict.
William Archer was arrested on July 27, 1967, and charged with 3 counts of first-degree homicide. Zella Archer, Bernie Archer, and Mary Brinker Post. The trial, conducted without a jury before a judge, relied heavily on the testimony of 15 medical experts who painstakingly ruled out natural causes and established insulin as a homicide weapon. Archer was found guilty and sentenced to death on March 6, 1968. Summary of the California Supreme Court of Appeals 1970 submitted by the Archer defense team. The resulting appeal, People v. Archer, became a landmark decision. The court held that the Sixth Amendment's right to a speedy trial does not apply to the period before an indictment is filed. Furthermore, in homicide cases where there is no statute of limitations, the prosecution is entitled to wait until medical science has progressed sufficiently to prove the cause of death. The court also reaffirmed that evidence of unchanged crimes is admissible when it demonstrates a unique modus operandi so distinct as to serve as a signature of the defendant.
The final years and historical significance are complex and multitasted.
In 1972, following a United States Supreme Court ruling that found existing death penalty statutes to be cruel and unusual, Archer's death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. He was transferred to the California Medical Facility in Vacaville, where he remained until his death from pneumonia on October 29, 1977, at the age of 65. The Archer case fundamentally altered the perception of insulin within the medical and legal communities. Once considered the perfect, untraceable poison, insulin became a substance that required careful monitoring and clinical oversight. The trial highlighted the weakness of hospital patients and spouses to those with specialized medical training, leading to stricter controls on the availability of insulin and the inclusion of hypoglycemia in routine forensic toxicological screenings. Archer's legacy is one of chilling clinical precision. By turning the danger signals he was trained to monitor into tools of his trade, he committed a series of homicides that were as much a betrayal of the medical profession as they were of his own family. His conviction serves as a testament to the persistence of law enforcement and the transformative power of forensic science to bridge a gap between suspicion and proof. The legal precedents established in his name continue to ensure that the passage of time and the sophistication of a homicide weapon are not insurmountable barriers to justice.
Learn from my story. Forensic science will eventually catch up with you.
That brings another episode of Homicide Cases to a close as I shut the file on William Archer. Join me next time where I will be opening the file on Gilligan and Amy Archer.
Thanks for watching. If this is your type of content, then give me a like and follow. This is Misfit signing off, and as always, stay safe.